When I first met the next speaker, I actually spoke to him for a while before realizing quite who he was, because he produced something quite by accident online, a YouTube video that I thought was just one of the best things I saw in a long while. He may mention it himself, he may not, but that particular video, I just loved it, and I must have watched that video about, I don't know, 50 times. If I just do a little excerpt from that, you might get an idea of what I'm talking about. You're insane, you're nuts, I can tell you're stuck on an electronic incident in your whole track. Now, does anyone know what that one is? Yeah, right. So, that was my introduction to the next speaker. I spoke to him for about 10 minutes before I realized it was actually him. So having said goodbye and all the rest of it, I then went back and went, oh my God, it's you! So it began all over again. So really, this guy will tell his own story, and like everybody else, everyone's got their own story to tell. So welcome to the stage, Stephen Jones.
Thank you very much for that kind introduction, Pete. I almost didn't recognise myself. My name is Stephen Jones, and I used to be a Scientologist. Firstly, I'd like to say that when I first met John Dignan, he was in fact driving a tractor, so the whole story about him being just a bus driver is clearly not true. He's also a tractor driver. 1 billion years. 1 billion years. That's the length of contract that I signed when I joined the Sea Org in 1986. Now, you might ask yourself, why would someone sign a contract for 1 billion years? All I can say is it seemed like a good idea at the time. I really can't give any more explanation than that. Yes, so I joined the Sea Org in 1986. This is at Saint Hill in East Grinstead. At the time I was very new to Scientology. I'd only been around for about 3 months. I was a bit of a loose end. I was a student, but I failed some exams and I couldn't really face taking them again, so I was sort of suddenly at a loose end and it seemed like a good idea at the time. So when I joined the Sea Org, I had this idea that it was comprised of these OT super beings, as you were told about, you heard about Scientology. People had magical, if not mystical, powers. They could do anything, say anything. They'd only need to go into any situation and just turn it around just like that and make a success of anything. I had a terrible shock when I got there and found out the truth. It was the most disorganised rabble I've ever come across. But not only that, there were times when it was actually, I had this idea that Scientology would enable people to be better people, kinder, gentler, more decent people. It was some of the most vicious things I've ever seen at that time occurred while I was in the Sea Org. Just to give you an idea of what it was like, we'd start at 9:30 in the morning and work through to 12. And when I say 12, I don't mean 12 lunchtime, I mean 12 midnight. That was the standard day. If we were good, we got Saturday mornings off. If we were really good, we got the whole Saturday off. But in a year and a half, I never got the whole Saturday off. I was told that the minimum wage you'd get every week would be £18 a week. That was later increased to £23 a week. I was told that was the minimum. So you should get bonuses on top of that. I think I got the minimum wage about twice in the year and a half that I was there, just twice. More commonly, you'd get between £5 and £10 if you were lucky. Many weeks we didn't get anything at all, nothing. So I worked out that the 87.5 hours that I routinely did every week, I earned about 8p an hour. And out of that, you'd have to buy anything personal, like toiletries, soap, toothpaste, anything like that at all. Even your own clothes. At that time, we didn't even get a uniform. You had to buy our own clothes. You had to do your own laundry, so we didn't have a laundry on site, so we had Saturday morning at the trip down into town, take your laundry along, and pay for it yourself. So that was just one of the things. when I was in the SEAL, and I pretty soon realised that if I wanted to hang on to my sanity, I had to get rather leave very quickly. At that point, you'd think I'd had enough. You know, I was driven almost to the point of despair. Remember, at this time I was only about 23 years old. I still, in theory, had a whole life ahead of me. I had many possibilities I could have done. As I said, I didn't finish my degree course, so but I still had some good qualifications. But I still believed, I'd been indoctrinated enough to believe that Scientology was the answer to everything. So I continued with Scientology. I wish I hadn't, but that's the situation I did. And it took me a long time to finally realise just what effect the indoctrination has on you. It's difficult to describe. You can tell people about the facts. You can say, I did this on this date, and I did that, and this. You never really get a sense of why these people did these things. And all I can say is, if you're not in that situation, you've never been through it, it is very difficult for you to understand the motivation. It's just, what you've got to remember is Scientology says, this is the answer to everything. Literally everything. Every question you wanted to know about life, the universe and everything, literally is told in Scientology, and it will enable you to rise to unimaginable heights. You become basically a super being. That was my understanding, and that's contained in the scriptures and so on by Hubbard. He talks about people with these remarkable powers, and that's what I wanted to get. And once you've bought into that, it is so difficult to let go. So difficult to let go. And even when I left, I couldn't leave. And it sounds rather absurd. For the last few years of my time in Scientology, which was about 22 years, I was very, very unhappy. At some points, I was in the most deepest despair you can ever imagine. I remember one time I came out of an auditing session, and there was all this activity. They were putting up a tent to one side of the castle because they were going to have this big event called for the International Associations of Scientologists. And there was a lot of traffic, and there was a big articulated lorry reversing back very slowly, I mean literally 3 or 4 miles an hour, no more than that. And I was standing on the steps by the castle, I was looking down, and I could see these huge wheels just slowly turning, and I just thought I could just walk forward, lie down in front of those wheels, and that would be, all my suffering would be over. And that was the point. I thought, there's something wrong. You know, I should be coming out of session thinking, you know, this is fantastic. You know, people will talk about their wins, about all these things they've achieved when they've got out of session and things they've handled. And I thought something's wrong. And then another time, a little bit later than that, I came out of work at lunchtime, and I'm walking down the road, and I thought, no, my life is not worth living. And then I thought, that's just ridiculous. My life is not worth living. I mean, all right, I wasn't that young. I was 41 at the time. Had a really good job, well paid. Had my health, everything else. And I'm thinking, my life is not worth living. Something is very seriously wrong. But even after I'm thinking that way, it still took me a long time to finally face up to the fact that Scientology was, or at least the Scientology as offered by the Church of Scientology, because I think it's only fair to say that I don't think that all of Scientology is bad. There are some parts I think are potentially beneficial to people. Many people could benefit from some aspects of it, but the trouble is it's sorting that out from the abusive organisation that controls it, and they do control it. They don't want to let anybody else deliver Scientology because it takes away the market. So anyway, after I decided that I was going to leave, I couldn't bring myself to actually formally do it. I would just
prevaricated and talked about other things and everything else. I was reading forums and listening to what other people have said and all sorts of stuff. And yet I couldn't make that break. And then two things happened. One, on one of the forums, the ex-Scientologist message board, the board owner, Michelle, she posted a thread called "It's Time to Get Off the Fence." And she basically talked about, well, look, if you're either a Scientologist or you're not, if you're not, then why are you keeping quiet about it and going along? And it was just literally as though she was talking to me, because I thought, that's me. I know that I'm never going back. I'm never going back to Scientology. But I can't bring myself to do that, to actually formally say I'm not going back. And that was one thing. And then the second thing was, early in 2008, this thing happened on the internet. I'm not sure if you'd describe it as a group, collective, or whatever. Anonymous appeared out of the blue, and it was just, I can't describe how I felt when I went up in February 2008. I went up to London to see what was going on, because for all I knew, it was just a bunch of crazy people were talking about what they were going to do, making all these boasts and everything else. And I remember when I stood outside London Org, and I saw this wall. I was standing on the same side as the org, outside, and there was this wall of people. It was about 300, 350 placards and banners and everything. And it was I spoke to someone, and they really knew a lot about the subject. And it was just, I knew then everything in that instant, overnight, had changed. Everything had changed in regard to the critics of Scientology and the fight against the cult. And it was like I was thinking, oh God, how can I leave this? And I'm going to I want to get my money back. And how can I take on this organisation, all these resources? And it's like you're feeling you're all alone. And suddenly, this army just sprints over the hill. And it's just army. It's not your personal army, but it's an army that comes up and says, without even talking to you directly, it says, we are fighting alongside you. And that made such a difference. Just the thought that, I'm not alone. I mean, there was all these forums and everything else, but just the fact that people out there were willing to get out on the streets and confront the cult face to face, which it had happened before, but only in very small numbers, and you felt the cult had been on top of it because they could, control it and set people onto them. But there was so many that you just knew they could not stop this. So I then asked for my money back, and that was another story which I won't go into. Suffice it to say that I had spent quite a lot of money. I'm a bit ashamed of it, and I don't like admitting it. I certainly don't talk to my family, but I think they're going to see this video anyway. But I was in the Church of Scientology for 22 years, and I spent, and this is not by any means a lot of money compared to a lot of people, I spent around about £90,000. And to some people, you'd say, well, that sounds like a lot of money. That's everything, huge amount. I've never seen that amount of money. But that really is nothing in comparison to other people I know of. But anyway, I still had some money on account. This was my money. They agreed it was my money. And I said, I want my money back. And at first, they were very nice to me, or fairly nice. And they said, we'll give you your money, just fill in this form, blah, 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 go and see these people, send it off. Week and a half later, you'll get your money. So I did that, and essentially they tried to weasel out of it. They just ignored me. After telling me, yes, we'll make sure you get it, then they just refused any communication with me. And I had to threaten a solicitor and everything else and do a lot of other stuff and make it very uncomfortable for them. And they eventually paid out. So I did get my money back, but at that point I thought, well, why is this organisation being so dishonest? Why are they trying to cheat me after doing? And that really made me angry. So I thought, right, well, I'm going to really find, because at that point I just wanted to leave. I was so ashamed at being conned and what I'd been through and ripped off and everything else. I just wanted to get out. I just wanted to leave it all behind. So, but it was that attitude. So, if you're watching Philip Harbour, it was your two-faced attitude telling me that you were going to give me my money back and then refusing to talk to me afterwards. That caused me to speak out. So you might want to bear that in mind. So eventually I did get my money back, but it left such a sour taste in my mouth. I thought, right, well, I'm not going to let them get away with that. And I haven't. I've done some, nowhere near as much as other people, but I've tried to do something. So one question I think a lot of people would ask is, if you had all these problems and other things while you were in and you weren't having a good time, because I had this realization one time. I thought, thinking back, the happiest times in my life have been when I've not been doing Scientology services, and some of the most traumatic experiences and most depressing times are when I've been doing services that are supposed to fix all these problems. And that was a big realization for me. So, anyway, I got my money back, and you think people would ask you, well, why did you stay in for so long? And it is a very difficult question to answer, because it took me a lot of thought, and I like to pride myself as being quite a rational person, come from a sort of scientific and engineering background, and I like to work things through and work out what's based on facts, not fiction, and everything else. And I thought, why did I do that? And the answer I came to is that the conditioning you're put through poisons, and I don't mean this lightly, it poisons your mind so that you are unable to analytically analyse or just basically even think straight. You believe all the lies you're told, literally, all these things that Hubbard did, apparently, all these miraculous things that other people were doing, and then you find out afterwards it's just PR, and you believe it, and you think you're going to be like this, and you keep convincing yourself. And I think a lot of the people that are still in Scientology are there because they can't face the truth. They know there are lots of problems. They know they've got up to the OT levels, and they know they haven't got superpowers, and they know they can't just make things go right just by thinking about it. They know that. But they'd rather live a lie than admit to themselves that they've been conned. They'd rather keep going than admit they were wrong and try and back out. This is French water, by the way. I mention that because I remember when I was in the church, the church had quite a lot of problems in France, legal actions and so on, and obviously since then they've had the conviction for fraud. And I thought, right, I'm not going to buy anything French. I'm going to boycott them. That is the mentality you have. If somebody's attacking you, they are a suppressive person. They're evil. They, as Jerry said earlier, they're comparable to Hitler and Stalin and people like that. Literally. There's no two ways about it. If you're attacking the church, you are evil through and through. So now I make a point of buying French stuff. That's pretty much all I had to say. I was going to speak for about 3 hours, but that's too long, apparently. So if there are any questions, I'll be happy to take those. Jamie.
Something I'd like to ask often and totally answer for your own individual experience. What about Scientology work for you? Especially as you move on to the levels, I absolutely agree that there's a certain point of pride that people don't want to admit the farther they get along the bridge that they've been conned. But at what point in the earliest level, we'll come out on that. At what point in the earliest level, what do you think worked for you that helped you continue?
Yes, that's a good question, Jamie. And when I think about it, I'm not going to say that I didn't get some benefit from Scientology, because I did. You know, it changed my outlook in life. It gave me a lot more positive aspect or view of life. It was, when I came into Scientology, it was a very low point in my life. I was never suicidal or anything like that, but I used to get quite depressed and stuff. And then suddenly this thing comes along, and it's like your life up until that point has been black and white, and that's all it's ever going to be. And then suddenly a door opens, and you're looking at this vista, and it's all colour, and it's something magical and wonderful. So there was that aspect, and there was some things that probably gave me a bit more confidence in being myself and everything else. But I think you could probably get most of what is valuable out of Scientology by studying it for 1-2 years or something like that. Everything that you really need to, or you could get out of it, you could get in that time period. But it wasn't so much, this is, when I look back on it, this is one of the things that I thought, how could you be so stupid? Because I never really got these huge wins that other people were talking about. It was always because I thought, the next thing will handle it, the next thing, or after that, or I'll solve all these problems when I get to OT. I had this crazy idea one time, after I'd got back on the lines in the big way and I was spending a lot of money. I thought, you know, I've really got to stop messing around, because you'd be told this, you've got to stop messing around, you've got to go OT full-time or whatever. And I thought I could leave my job, I've got enough savings to just go spend a year all out, go to OT, and then of course I've got all these abilities, so I don't need a job. I can go out and I can just make anything go right. And I thought that. Thank God I didn't, because I tend to think when I've been now, I'd certainly be penniless and everything else. But you really, that's the way you think. You think, you know, I've got to really, I'm not getting the results I expected, not because of the fault of the church, it's my fault, because that is always pressed upon you. It is your fault. Now, they have this idea in Scientology that bad things, there's a sort of flow. It's like you have an outflow, like you could be talking to somebody, or you do something like punch someone on the nose. In that case, you'd get an inflow back, which is someone probably punching you on the nose. So there's a sort of a balance there in Scientology. And they have this concept of pulling it in, which basically means something bad happens to you. That's because you did something bad to somebody else at some point. And I remember one time, which was pretty much the last straw. I was speaking to what's called the ethics officer at St. Hill. And she said, I said to her that I just was so fed up with the service I received and everything else. And she said, yes, Stephen, I know, I still can't, even after what I know about the church, I still trouble getting my head around it. But this illustrates their attitude. Yes, Stephen, I know we've given you a bad service, but you have to look at what you have done to pull it in. Now, this is an organisation comprised of super beings, and the reason they couldn't deliver service to me was because I made them go wrong. Well, in the Scientology world it does, but I was very angry at the time, and I thought, well, I just knew then that they were just never prepared to deliver the service. Sorry, Jamie again.
I'm sorry to ask a secondary question on that, but
that's all right.
Was there a point when you were moving up the bridge where there was a specific level or phase where your brain wrestled with it the most, where you were like, you had the most difficulty rationalizing it to yourself?
Yes. Not so much a point, because I didn't get an awful long way up the bridge. I bought a lot of auditing. I had over 400 hours, and I was told you'd get to clear in about 100, 200 hours, and it never happened, and I was just strung along. And you see, afterwards, now they'll probably say, well, you're an SP, that's why you didn't get the gains. My response would be to that, well, if I'm not getting the gains, why you keep telling me I'm doing really well and then selling me more auditing? But it was a sort of gradual process. I look back and I thought, you know, I've done all this auditing, and what have I got to show for it? And then there's this internal conflict, because because you've already been indoctrinated, and you know that Scientology is the only thing that works and can set people free. You know that. And if you were asked, how do you rationalise it? And you think, well, hang on, I just know that. It's one of these things you fundamentally know. And when you start picking it apart in detail, you realise you don't know that at all. You've just been told that, and you've been made to believe that by being in that group that just promotes this one view. Anybody who dissents from that is thrown out, and you can see the reason why, because they don't want you to spread these stories of dissension. So it was, looking back, not so much one point, but a gradual process of when I was having my auditing, and you just go round in circles sometimes. Auditing, you're expected to tell everything, so they go into all your deepest secrets and everything else. And this is one of the most destructive things. I will just talk about this, because I think it is important. There's this concept that if you want to achieve results in auditing, you have to be able to communicate freely with the auditors. So if this is something you're not talking about, like sometime you stole an apple, or you did something wrong, you stole a car, or something even minor, like you looked at someone and thought, well, he looks a complete prat, oh my God, you'd be thinking, oh my God, no, that's going to come up in session, and I'm going to have to talk about that. So to go through all these things, you have to talk about everything. And the auditors are trained that if they get a certain reaction on the e-meter, they have to look for this thing. So even if it's not there, they have to look for it. And this is one of the most destructive things that I've ever come across, is that they're saying, you've done something bad and you're not talking about it. Tell me about it. And you're looking and you're looking and looking and you can't find it. So immediately you're spinning round and round and round, and one part of you says, I know I haven't done anything. The other part says, well, I must have, because they're telling you. And I remember one time, I won't go into what it was, but somebody asked me a question. He said, you've done something. What is it? Have you murdered someone? And I said, no, of course not. And he looks down his meter, and you think, my God, no. And for a second, you really start to think, hang on, have I killed someone? And then blanked out my memory. Seriously. And that is the sort of thing that can drive people insane, literally. Because you know, on one hand, you know you haven't done something, and then because the meter says something, and if the auditor isn't properly trained, or even they don't know what they're doing, they can be looking for something, and you're suddenly thinking, I'm a really bad person. And in the end, I started bringing up stuff that I knew I hadn't done, and yet I'm talking about it as if I have. So that creates this conflict, and it is so destructive. I was really at the point of despair at that time, because I'm thinking, after I've done this thing, I just must be such an evil person. It was only afterwards I realised, well, no, I didn't actually do that. That was a dream. Yes.
Taking the point where you said that maybe my people stick to their lines and probably slowly down from walking because they feel that people with just a chance to go back. And the right way for people to talk about volunteers and specific movements that really they join and they're giving that they're going to gain listeners from whatever they're going to talk to the Congress and they join so that you can talk down the long struggle. But they can't get away from it, because if they do, they will have to use themselves and what they contribute to is wrong.
I think it's very much the same sort of mental mechanism, yes. It's like when they've gone so far and done so much in a particular cause, even if it's proven to you that it's not the right cause, it's wrong, they can't admit it to themselves. Because then they have to admit that everything that they did in that cause was wrong. And I think people do, I don't know, this is just a trait of human nature. They have a problem admitting that. But when it's something serious like that example, obviously it's more serious. Yes, absolutely. Anybody else? Sorry, one more question. Well, there's some aspects. There's these basic auditing processes called the objectives, which, I mean, it sounds bizarre, but it involves you doing really strange things, like you're walking around a room, picking up a bottle, touching the wall, picking up a book, and all these sort of things. And I really believe that some people could benefit from that. I certainly got some benefit. The most benefit I ever got from Scientology was doing those sort of processes. Right. Is that it? Right. Thank you very much.